They called me the Nanny, while I held an AI empire valued at $1.2 billion. Tonight, their laughter was the soundtrack to the collapse of the illusion my father had built. The champagne glass slipped in my father's hand as he laughed loud enough for everyone at the table to hear. "Still a nanny, Emma," he said, swirling his drink like the words were harmless. But they weren't. They landed like stones. My brother Liam joined in, grinning wide. "Wiping kids' noses won't make you rich, sis." The guests laughed with him, a polished chorus of approval. I smiled faintly, holding the stem of my glass tight enough that it almost cracked. I wanted to leave right then, but I didn't. I stayed because this time I wasn't the same girl who'd swallowed their mockery in silence. This time, I had something none of them knew about. Snow fell outside the Carter mansion that night, thick and soft, burying the world in white. The lake shimmered beyond the frosted windows, and every tree on the property glowed with strings of golden lights. It was our annual luxury Christmas party, my father's favorite stage. Politicians, bankers, CEOs, and their glittering wives filled the dining room dressed in velvet and diamonds. The house smelled of cinnamon and roast lamb. The sound of jazz drifted through the air, expensive and practiced. Everything sparkled except for the space inside me. I stood near the bar, pretending to study the ice melting in my glass of tonic. It was strange how memories could echo louder than the music, years of being the family disappointment condensed into every laugh, every patronizing smile. I could almost hear my father's voice from a decade ago. "You're wasting your degree playing nanny to other people's children." Back then I believed him. Now I know better. "Emma." My mother's voice cut through the chatter. She approached, elegant as ever in emerald silk. "Don't stand in the corner. Come say hello to the Bentleys. Their son just joined Liam's firm." Her tone was smooth, polite, but her eyes carried the same unspoken plea. "Don't embarrass us." I followed her, a familiar act. Mr. Bentley shook my hand, warm and perfumed. "Ah, the daughter. We never see in the press," he said. "What do you do these days?" Before I could answer, my father leaned in, that performative grin already on his face. "She's still working as a nanny," he announced. "Always good with kids, our Emma." The table laughed again. I felt the old sting rise in my throat, but I swallowed it. "Yes," I said evenly. "Children have a lot to teach if you listen." A few smiles faltered. My father didn't. "Always so philosophical," he said. "Maybe someday she'll find something practical." Liam clapped me on the shoulder. "Don't take it personally, Em. Not everyone's cut out for the corporate grind." "I'll leave that to you," I replied, meeting his eyes. "You've always been good at grinding people." For a moment his grin slipped. The laughter moved on, but the chill stayed. I stepped back toward the window, the cold glass against my palm grounding me. I'd built something they couldn't see, something they'd soon read about whether they wanted to or not. But I didn't want revenge tonight. I just wanted to remember how this moment felt the last time they'd ever see me small. A waiter passed by offering canapés. I shook my head, watching the snow gather thicker beyond the pane. The lake's surface mirrored the sky, still and endless. Inside, voices rose and fell, wine, pride, arrogance. My father loved holding court. He always had. I'd once admired that. Now I saw it for what it was, insecurity dressed as confidence. He raised his glass again, calling the room to attention. "A toast," he said, his voice booming. "To success, to family, to legacy." His eyes swept the table and landed squarely on Liam. "To my son, the future of Carter Investments." Applause erupted. Glasses clinked. My mother beamed. I stayed silent. And of course he added, smirking, to Emma, the heart of the family. "Always dependable, always. Humble." Laughter again. Even the chandelier seemed to shake with it. I felt the air tighten around me, hot despite the winter chill outside. My chest thudded, but my face stayed calm. That was the thing about humiliation. It used to burn, but now it only reminded me I was alive. I set my glass down, perfectly steady. "Thank you," I said softly, loud enough for those closest to hear. You'll want to remember this moment." My father blinked. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Nothing," I said. "Just one of those nights you'll never forget." He chuckled, dismissing me. Liam leaned toward Rachel, his wife whispering something that made her laugh politely. I turned back toward the window, watching the reflection of the glittering room shimmer against the snow. My pulse slowed. The truth was already out there in print and headlines waiting to arrive. Forbes had called that afternoon. Emma, my mother, called from across the room. "Help me with the dessert trays," I smiled, nodding. "Of course." I carried the silver trays to the kitchen where the staff whispered quietly, oblivious to the performance outside. My phone buzzed in my clutch, a notification I'd been expecting. Forbes.com, Brightseed founder Emma Carter, named Entrepreneur of the Year. I stared at the headline at my own photograph, smiling back. The logo I'd designed 3 years ago, the one my father had mocked as too sentimental, glowed at the top of the article. Brightseed Technologies valued at $1.2 billion. A strange calm filled me. Not triumph, not vindication, just clarity. From the other room, I heard my father's booming voice again. "She's always been the caretaker, my Emma. Couldn't run a lemonade stand if her life depended on it." Laughter followed, though softer now, slower. Then the sound of his phone ringing. His tone changed, laughter cut short. "Yes, this is Charles Carter," he said. "Who?" "Forbes." A pause. Silence. Then lower, quieter, "I see." The music continued, but the conversation had stopped. When I stepped back into the dining room, everyone's faces were turned toward me. My father, pale, the phone still in his ear. Liam's smirk had vanished. My father cleared his throat, voice trembling. "Emma," he said slowly, "it seems there's been some news." I smiled faintly. "Oh," he swallowed. They just called to confirm your company." Brightseed. "Yes," I said softly, steady as the snow outside. "It's doing well." The silence that followed was perfect, crisp and clean, like fresh snow over old footprints. The laughter was gone. Only the truth remained. And in that stillness, I realized something I hadn't before. I hadn't come for revenge. I'd come for peace. But peace, I learned, sometimes sounds exactly like silence after laughter dies. The morning after the party, the snow outside my window looked almost too clean, too quiet, as if the world itself had pressed reset while I lay awake remembering every word, every laugh that had echoed in my father's house. I hadn't slept. The adrenaline had burned through me like fire and ice. I watched the sunrise paint the lake gold, and for the first time I didn't feel small. I felt done. I brewed coffee in my apartment overlooking downtown Seattle, surrounded by the gentle hum of a life I'd built from nothing. The walls were lined with sketches, early designs for Brightseed, back when it was just a dream on my kitchen counter. Each drawing was smudged with caffeine and exhaustion, but they were mine. My phone buzzed nonstop, missed calls from my brother, from my mother, from numbers I didn't recognize. I ignored them all until the screen flashed, "Dad." I let it ring once, twice, then pressed decline. The silence that followed was heavier than his voice would have been. He'd never called to apologize before. He wasn't the type. He was the type to control, to lecture, to demand, but not to listen. I set the phone down and exhaled. The smell of coffee filled the room, earthy and warm. My reflection in the window looked different, somehow older, yes, but also lighter. I didn't look like the girl they used to call the helper, the one who cleaned up everyone's mess at Christmas. That girl had died the night I walked away from their table. The doorbell rang. Nora, my operations manager, and truthfully, my only real friend, stood outside in a gray coat and red scarf, holding a bag of croissants. "You made the news," she said, stepping in. "Front page of Forbes, CNN, TechCrunch, even The Guardian. They're calling you the empathy engineer." I laughed softly. "That's a new one." "It's perfect," she said, grinning. "You turned AI into something that actually understands emotion. You built an empire out of kindness. I hope your father's choking on his ego right now." Nora, I warned, half smiling. What? Don't tell me you still feel bad for them. I didn't answer. I poured her coffee, my mind drifting back to the night before the look in my father's eyes when he realized the truth. It wasn't anger that haunted me. It was disbelief. The man who had spent his entire life measuring worth in numbers had finally seen one number too big to ignore. I realized the prize wasn't revenge. It was the quiet, autonomous life I'd built, I said quietly. Now I just need the distance to enjoy it. Then you've already won, Nora replied, settling onto the couch. You built something real. That's more than most people ever do. I smiled, but inside I felt the familiar ache, the one that came from knowing success didn't erase loneliness. The apartment was beautiful, yes. Glass steel, a skyline view. But it was also silent. Too silent. My thoughts wandered back to when I first left home. I was 23, broke and furious, the kind of fury that doesn't explode but corrodes. I'd moved to Seattle with a backpack and idea and nothing else. The nanny job was supposed to be temporary, a way to survive, while I coded prototypes at night. The children I cared for were kind curious. They taught me things my own family never had: patience, presence, joy without judgment. They saw me before I saw myself. One evening, the youngest girl, Sophie, had asked, "Why don't you smile when you look at yourself?" I didn't know how to answer. She'd been 6 years old, holding a stuffed rabbit with one missing ear. I'd laughed, brushing her hair behind her ear, and told her maybe I forgot how. That night I went home and started sketching Brightseed's first interface, an emotional learning model designed to help kids express feelings through color and sound. I didn't have investors or advisors. I had crayons, a secondhand laptop, and an endless supply of quiet anger that turned into fuel. It took 3 years, 2 failed prototypes, and 1 heartbreak before the program finally worked. Brightseed became my escape, then my purpose, then my miracle. Nora interrupted my thoughts. The team wants to celebrate. Big dinner, press coverage, the whole thing. You deserve it. I shook my head. No press dinners, not yet. I need time. She studied me. You mean you need space from your family? Both, I admitted. I walked to the window. Outside, the city moved on buses, lights, people carrying umbrellas under flurries of snow. The world didn't care about family drama. It cared about innovation, progress, profit. But I cared. That was the problem. I opened my laptop and reread the article headline, "Brightseed, the AI, Startup Teaching Compassion to Machines." Underneath, a quote from me that the journalist had pulled from an old interview. Technology shouldn't replace empathy. It should remind us of it. I closed the laptop. My own words stung. The phone buzzed again, this time a text from my brother. "You humiliated Dad. Call me." I didn't. I couldn't. I wasn't sure if I felt guilty or free. Maybe both. When I was a teenager, Dad used to tell me, "You're too emotional, Emma. That's your weakness." I'd believed him for years. But emotion wasn't weakness. It was power. I just learned how to speak it in code. By noon, the snow had turned to rain. The phone kept lighting up. Finally, I answered. My mother's voice came through, soft, measured. "Emma, your father isn't well." My stomach tightened. "What do you mean, he's processing?" "He didn't sleep. He's embarrassed. You know how he is. That's not the same as being sick." A pause. "He asked me to tell you he wants to talk. Maybe fix things." I hesitated. He never wanted to fix things before. "People change," she said quietly. "Sometimes only when they have to." When the call ended, I sat in silence. The city outside blurred through raindrops. For a moment, I saw the girl I used to be, 20, scared, desperate for approval. And I whispered to her, "We don't need it anymore." Nora gathered her things. "You okay?" "I'm fine." I lied. She paused at the door. "You know you can forgive without going back, right?" I nodded, but the truth was harder. I didn't know how to do either. After she left, I sat at my desk again, staring at the framed photo of me with Sophie, the little girl who once made me promise to smile more. Behind us, her family's Christmas tree glowed, simple, small, nothing like the Carter mansion. but the warmth in that photo was real. I smiled now just slightly and whispered, "I remember." Outside, the rain slowed. The clouds parted, letting in a thin beam of light that spilled across my desk. My father's last words at the party echoed in my mind, not the mockery but the shock. "Seems there's been some news." Yes, I thought. There has been. But the real news wasn't that Forbes had called. It was that I'd stopped waiting for him to. The call came 2 days later. My father's number again. This time, I didn't hesitate. "Emma," his voice rasped through the line lower than I remembered. "We should talk." For a second, I didn't breathe. I expected the same tone I'd known my whole life, sharp commanding a man used to being obeyed. But this voice was smaller, stripped of its armor. "I'm listening," I said. "I said things I shouldn't have," he murmured. "At the party. You humiliated me. I finished for him, in front of everyone. I didn't mean—" "Yes, you did," I said quietly. "You always meant it. You just didn't expect the world to hear who I really am." There was a pause. I could almost hear him exhale the sound of a man realizing his control was gone. "Can we meet?" he asked. "Just you and me. No one else." I didn't want to. Every cell in my body said, "Don't give him another chance to hurt you." But something else, that old daughter-shaped ache, whispered go. Closure, maybe? Or curiosity? I agreed. The cafe was quiet, tucked between a bookstore and a florist on Madison Avenue. It was the kind of place that smelled like comfort, roasted beans, old pages, and rain-soaked coats. He was already there, sitting by the window, hands clasped, face drawn. He looked older than he had at Christmas. His confidence had slipped like a suit that no longer fit. When he saw me, his expression flickered pride, guilt, confusion. "Emma. Dad." We sat. Neither of us reached for the menus. The silence stretched thick and awkward. Finally, he cleared his throat. "I read the article." "Forbes." I nodded. "I figured you would." He rubbed his temple. "You built that, Brightseed. You did all of it without saying a word." "I tried," I said softly. "You never heard me." His eyes met mine. "That's not fair." "No," I said. "What's not fair is how many years I believed I wasn't enough because you couldn't see me." He looked down at his hands. They trembled slightly. For the first time in my life, I saw my father as human, fragile, frightened, imperfect. It didn't excuse the damage, but it explained the silence. "I thought I was protecting you," he said finally. "You were so emotional, so idealistic. I didn't want you to fail." "You didn't protect me," I replied. "You erased me." He winced. I didn't mean to twist the knife, but the truth had waited too long. He took a deep breath. "Your mother keeps saying I should apologize." "So don't," I interrupted. "Don't say it because she told you to. Say it if you mean it." His jaw clenched, the old habit. He'd never been good with apologies. The man who could close multi-million-dollar deals couldn't say "I'm sorry" to his daughter. But then his voice broke, barely audible. "I am." I didn't realize I was holding my breath until I exhaled. "Thank you," I said. And I meant it. The waiter brought coffee. Neither of us touching it. Outside, snow began to fall again, slow and deliberate. He looked out the window. "I used to think success was about legacy, about what people remember when you're gone. And now I asked. Now I think it's about who still answers when you call." For a long moment, I said nothing. The weight of years hung between us, every insult disguised as advice, every time I'd smiled through humiliation, every quiet night I'd worked to prove I was more than what he believed. Finally, I reached across the table, my hand hovering over his. "You don't have to understand everything I said. You just have to see me now." He nodded once, eyes shining. For the first time, we didn't argue. We just sat there, two people who'd both built walls so high, neither could see the other until the wind knocked them down. When I got home, the air in my apartment felt lighter. I poured myself tea and sank into the couch, my mind replaying the conversation. It hadn't fixed everything, nothing could, but it had shifted something deep inside me. I wasn't waiting for approval anymore. I was reclaiming my story. The phone buzzed again. This time it was an email subject line, invitation. Brightseed Annual Summit. I'd forgotten the date was so close. I was supposed to give the keynote speech in front of hundreds of partners and investors. Nora had written the first draft of my remarks weeks ago, but suddenly I knew what I needed to say. Not about innovation, not about profit, about empathy, the one thing that had built my empire and nearly destroyed my family. I opened a blank document and began typing, "The future of technology isn't intelligence, it's understanding." The words came easily, flowing like a confession. I wrote about the girl who'd been mocked for caring too much, who'd turned that tenderness into code that could teach machines to recognize human emotion. I wrote about forgiveness, the hardest kind, the kind you give to people who never asked for it. When I finished, I leaned back, reading the final line, "Empathy doesn't make you weak. It makes you unstoppable." My father's face flashed in my mind, not the man who'd laughed at me, but the one who sat across from me today, trying fumbling human. Maybe that was enough. Maybe that was everything. That night I walked down to the waterfront where the city lights shimmered across the bay. The cold bit at my cheeks, but I didn't mind. The water reflected streaks of gold and blue rippling softly. A little girl passed by, bundled in a pink coat, holding her mother's hand. She turned and smiled at me, a smile so pure it broke something open in my chest. I smiled back. My phone buzzed again. A text from Dad. Just 2 words, proud, always. For the first time in years, I believed him. I slipped the phone into my pocket and whispered into the wind, "Me too." Above me, the first star appeared faint and steady. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It hadn't been for a while. It was about peace and the quiet, extraordinary power of finally being seen. The day of the Brightseed Summit arrived, with a gray Seattle sky that seemed to mirror my nerves. The stage was already set, hundreds of chairs aligned under white light, the company's logo glowing on the massive screen behind the podium. Cameras from CNBC, Bloomberg, and Forbes lined the aisles. I'd been in meetings like this before, but never with my name on the banner. "Are you ready?" Nora asked, handing me a wireless mic. She looked proud, steady the way she always did before something big. I smiled faintly. Ready enough? Outside the glass walls, rain streaked down in slow trails, softening the city's edges. Inside, the hum of voices built like a tide, employees, investors, reporters, all waiting for me. They were here to celebrate the billion-dollar valuation, the technology, the vision. None of them knew they were about to hear something else entirely. When the announcer's voice echoed, my heartbeat synced with the rhythm of applause. I walked out, lights, blinding faces blurring. I used to fear this moment being seen. Now I craved the truth more than the comfort of anonymity. "Good morning," I began. When I started Brightseed, I was working as a nanny. I didn't have investors or degrees that impressed anyone. I had crayons, code, and a stubborn belief that empathy could be taught even to machines. A quiet laugh rippled through the crowd. I smiled not out of nerves, but out of recognition. They were listening. I continued. "We live in a world obsessed with intelligence. Faster, smarter, stronger. But what if the future we need isn't about intelligence at all? What if it's about understanding the words weren't from a pitch deck? They were from a place raw and personal." I told them about the children who inspired Brightseed, how one little girl once asked me why adults stopped listening when they grew up. I told them that the hardest part of innovation isn't building something new. It's unlearning the idea that kindness doesn't belong in business. When I finished, the silence in the room wasn't awkward, it was alive. Then came the applause, rising like a wave, thunderous and honest. Nora met me backstage, her eyes shining. "You killed it," she whispered. No one expected a tech keynote to make them cry. I laughed softly, adrenaline still buzzing in my veins. Then it worked. But as the applause faded behind me, the truth settled in my chest like an ache. Success had come at a price when I still wasn't sure I'd been willing to pay. Later that afternoon, the office was quiet. Most of the team had gone home to celebrate. I sat alone in my glass-walled office overlooking the rain-slick city. The trophy from the summit sat on my desk, gold and gleaming. I reached out to touch it, but my hand stopped halfway. It wasn't the trophy I wanted. It belonged. And I still didn't know where I truly belonged between the family that had once rejected me and the world that now revered me. The intercom buzzed. Emma Nora's voice said, "Someone's here to see you." Before I could ask who, the door opened. My brother Liam. He looked different, not in appearance but in energy. His usual swagger had softened. He wore a simple gray coat instead of one of his tailored suits. "Hey," he said, stepping in. "You're hard to get on the phone these days." "I've been busy," I said carefully. He smirked. "So I've heard. Forbes the summit. Dad's been talking about nothing else. He's different lately." "Is he?" "Yeah," he said. "He doesn't shout anymore." "It's weird." I studied him for a moment. "Why are you really here, Liam?" He hesitated, then reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded paper. "Mom asked me to give you this." It was a handwritten letter, my father's script, neat and deliberate. I didn't open it. "Not yet." "He's been reading everything about you," Liam said. "He keeps saying he wishes he'd paid more attention before. I think he's proud, Em." I looked up sharply. "He told you that?" "Not in those words," Liam said, but I could tell. He shrugged the way he always did when feelings got too close. "He misses you." For a long moment I didn't speak. The rain outside blurred the skyline, the city glowing like wet glass. "We talked," I said finally. "I'm not sure where we go from here." "Maybe you just let him try," Liam said. "You always gave people more grace than they deserved." "Don't stop now." I smiled faintly. "That's the first nice thing you've said to me since high school." He chuckled. "Don't get used to it." When he left, I sat at my desk, the letter still unopened. My fingers traced its edges. My father's handwriting, the same hand that had signed my report cards, my birthday checks, and the first rejection of my business proposal years ago. I unfolded it slowly. "Emma," it began. I paused, holding the paper, the careful, decisive script so familiar from signed contracts and dismissive notes on my old business plans. The man who wrote this was the same man who once laughed at my degree, who called my first prototype a cute hobby, who believed ambition was a trait reserved only for men like him. It was a dizzying contradiction. For years I had craved this validation, rehearsing the exact words I'd say when he finally admitted his mistake. But now that the moment was here, the rehearsed anger felt hollow. I realized I wasn't waiting for an apology. I was waiting to see if the vulnerability in his voice was real. I needed to know if the father who only looked at numbers now saw me the person, not just the billion-dollar figure attached to my name. I've spent my life mistaking control for love. I wanted to protect you from failure, but I ended up protecting myself from watching you surpass me. I didn't know how to handle your courage, so I called it foolishness. That was my failure, not yours. I hope one day you can forgive me for not seeing who you already were. At the bottom, his signature wavered slightly, Dad. I read it twice, then a third time. My throat tightened, but I didn't cry. Instead, I smiled a small, fragile smile that felt like something breaking free inside me. Forgiveness, I realized, wasn't a transaction. It was a choice you made alone, long before the other person deserved it. I looked around the office, the glass walls, the hum of servers, the muted city beyond. Everything here had started as proof. Now it was peaceful. The rain stopped. Light broke through the clouds, turning the wet pavement into a mirror. I walked to the window, watching the reflection of my own face flicker against the skyline. My phone buzzed again, a text from my mother. "Dinner next Sunday, home. Just family." I typed back slowly, "I'll think about it." As the screen dimmed, I caught my reflection again, no longer the girl they left behind, no longer the daughter who had to earn her place. For the first time in my life, I was simply me, and that finally was enough. The message sat on my phone screen for 2 days before I answered it. "Dinner next Sunday. Home. Just family." My mother's words were simple, but they pulsed like a heartbeat. Just family. I wasn't sure if I still fit that description. By Friday, I had half a dozen drafts of replies, all unsent. Nora noticed my silence as we wrapped up another long day at the office. "You haven't been yourself," she said, leaning against my desk. "What's going on?" "My mom invited me to dinner," she arched her brow. "The same mom who let your father mock you in front of half of Boston." "Same one," I said, smiling faintly. "And you're thinking about going?" "I don't know," I admitted. "It's Christmas again. And despite everything, part of me still wants to believe it'll be different this time." She crossed her arms. "You've already given them forgiveness. You don't owe them another performance." "I'm not going for them," I said softly. "I think I'm going for me." She studied me for a moment, then nodded. "Then go. But go as Emma Carter, the woman who built her own empire, not the girl they used to treat like an errand runner." The drive up to Mercer Island on Sunday felt surreal. The Carter mansion sat where it always had perched above the lake, like a monument to pride and polished ambition. The lights glowed golden against the snow wreaths. On every window, the same white poinsettias my mother ordered every year. When I stepped out of the car, the cold hit me like a memory-sharp, clean reel. For a second, I just stood there watching my breath rise in the air. The last time I'd walked up this path, I'd left in tears. Tonight, I walked slowly, not out of hesitation, but control. The door opened before I knocked. My mother stood there in an ivory sweater, her silver hair pinned back neatly. "Emma," she breathed, her eyes soft. "You came." "Hi, Mom." Her smile trembled as she reached for me, pulling me into a brief hug that smelled like cinnamon and perfume. "Dinner's almost ready. Your father's trying." That word made me almost laugh. Trying. The great Charles Carter was trying. Inside the house looked the same polished oak floors, fire crackling the portrait of Liam and me, as children still hanging above the staircase. I paused under it, staring at the frozen smile of a girl who hadn't known what silence could cost. "Emma." My father's voice came from the living room. He stood by the fireplace, a glass of water in hand instead of whiskey. His posture was straighter than I remembered, but his eyes, those proud, calculating eyes, had softened. "You look good." "So do you," I said, though we both knew it wasn't true. Time had carved new lines into his face, deeper than age alone could explain. We sat at the dining table, just the four of us, Mom, Dad, Liam, and me. No guests, no staff, no audience. The air felt heavy but cleaner somehow, as if everyone had agreed to drop the performance. Mom served roast turkey and mashed potatoes, her holiday specialty. So she began lightly, "Bright Seed's doing incredible, isn't it? We saw you on TV again." "That speech?" "Oh, it made me cry." "Thank you," I said. It felt important to say. Dad nodded. "You've built something extraordinary. I can't pretend to understand half of it, but it's impressive." I smiled faintly. "You used to tell me emotion had no place in business." He hesitated, then gave a small shrug. "Turns out, I was wrong." The room went still for a second. My mother's fork paused midair. Liam looked up from his plate. "You were wrong," I repeated quietly. He nodded. "I didn't think empathy could lead to success. But I see it now. Maybe it's the only thing that does." The words hit harder than I expected. I didn't know whether to feel vindicated or sad for how long it had taken him to understand. We ate mostly in silence after that. Every so often, Mom would ask small questions about my work or the team. Liam talked about moving out of state, starting fresh. It was awkward, but not cruel. And in this house, that was progress. After dinner, Mom brought out coffee and pecan pie. Dad lingered by the fireplace, staring into the flames. "You know," he said slowly, "I read that Bright Seed's launching a school partnership next year, teaching kids emotional awareness through AI. That's beautiful." "Thank you," I said. "It's the project I'm proudest of." He turned toward me. "You built something that changes lives. That's worth more than any stock portfolio I ever had." It was such an uncharacteristic thing for him to say that for a moment I couldn't speak. I saw the flicker of vulnerability in his eyes, a man realizing too late that love was the only legacy that mattered. I stood walking toward the window. The snow outside had started again, soft flakes drifting down like forgiveness. Behind me I heard him say my name, not sharply, not commandingly. Just Emma. When I turned, he was holding a small velvet box. "Your mother wanted to give you this," he said, opening it. Inside was a delicate gold bracelet engraved with one word: enough. I stared at it, my throat tightening. "You bought this?" He shook his head. "She did. But I asked her to add the engraving." "You've always been enough, Emma. I just never told you." Tears blurred the lights around the room. For years I'd dreamed of hearing those words, rehearsing what I might say when they finally came. But now standing there, I realized I didn't need to say anything at all. I took the bracelet, fastened it around my wrist, and smiled through the tears. "Thank you." We didn't hug. We didn't need to. The distance between us wasn't gone, but it was smaller, bridgeable. As I left that night, my mother walked me to the door. "Come again soon," she said softly. "Next time, maybe no special occasion." Maybe I said. Outside, the snow crunched under my boots. The air was crisp, the stars faint but steady. I looked back once through the window. I saw my parents standing side by side, not perfect, not proud, but present. It wasn't a fairy tale reconciliation. It was something quieter, truer. When I got in the car, the bracelet glinted under the dashboard light. Enough. And for the first time in my life, I believed it. 2 weeks after that dinner, I thought things had finally settled. The air felt clearer between us. The tension softened into something almost like peace. But peace in my family never lasted long. It always came with an expiration date. The first crack appeared when Liam called one snowy morning. "Hey, Em, you got a minute?" His voice carried that old hesitation, the same tone he used before asking for something. "What's going on?" he sighed. "It's Dad. He's worried. The company, Brightseed. He read some articles online about your expansion plans, the one in Europe. He thinks you're moving too fast." I leaned back in my chair, eyes narrowing. Worried or controlling again? Maybe both. Of course. My father couldn't help himself. He'd apologized, yes, but control was his native language. He probably thought he was protecting me from risk, just like he had when I was 23, the day he called my idea for Brightseed a cute hobby. I took a slow breath. Tell him I appreciate his concern, but this time I'm the one making the rules. Liam hesitated. He's not trying to fight you. He's scared. I think he wants to feel included again. That word included hit something deep in me. All my life I'd wanted inclusion too, but on his terms. Now the tables had turned and I wasn't sure whether to let him in or keep him out. "I'll talk to him," I said finally. That night I couldn't sleep. My mind replayed the past like a film stuck on loop, all the Christmases I'd spent trying to earn his approval. The one when I brought him my first tech prototype, nervous and proud. He barely looked at it, saying, "You'll burn out before this thing even runs." The one when I'd baked cookies for everyone, only for him to ask why I didn't have a real job yet. Back then, I used to stare at the glittering tree lights and make promises to myself, next year I'll make him proud. Next year I'll have enough. But now, standing on the balcony of my penthouse with the city below me, I realized something else. Maybe he hadn't been the villain I'd painted him to be. Maybe he was just a man so afraid of failure that he couldn't imagine his daughter succeeding without him. The thought softened me a little. When the phone buzzed again, it wasn't Liam this time. It was Dad. "Text only. Can we talk?" "I'll come by your office tomorrow. Please?" I stared at the screen for a long time before typing, "Okay." He arrived the next afternoon wearing his old navy overcoat, snowflakes melting on the shoulders. His hands looked smaller somehow, like time had worn them down. "Emma," he said as I led him into my office, "this place is remarkable." I smiled faintly. "It's just work, Dad." He shook his head. "No, it's everything. You built this from nothing. You built it after I told you you couldn't." The honesty in his voice startled me. "I didn't mean to control you," he said. "I just didn't understand you. You were always different. You felt everything too much. I thought that would destroy you. Instead, it made you unstoppable." The words landed like warm sunlight through winter glass, soft but undeniable. I gestured toward the window where snow blurred the skyline. I didn't build this because of you, Dad. But maybe I built it in spite of you. He smiled sadly. I deserve that. We sat for a while, the quiet between us no longer hostile, but heavy with memory. Finally, he said, "You know what today is, don't you?" I frowned. "No." "December 23rd, he said softly. "Exactly 10 years since you left home." I hadn't realized. The memory hit me hard that freezing night when I'd stormed out with one suitcase vowing never to come back. I'd cried the whole drive to Seattle, equal parts rage and relief. He continued, "I watched you drive away from that house, headlights fading down the street. Your mother cried for hours. I wanted to stop you, but I couldn't. You looked too much like me that night, proud and angry." His voice cracked slightly. "And I knew I'd lost you. The silence that followed was unbearable." I turned toward the window again, blinking away tears. "You didn't lose me, Dad," I said quietly. "You just didn't look for me." When I finally looked back at him, his eyes were glistening. Maybe this is me looking now. Something in my chest loosened a knot years in the making. I walked around the desk, and handed him the framed Brightseed patent that hung on my wall. "Do you know why I kept this?" He looked down at the signature line, "Emma Carter, founder and CEO. To remind myself, I said that I didn't need anyone's permission to matter. He nodded slowly. "You never did." For a long moment we just stood there, the past hanging between us like smoke. Then he said something I never expected. "Can I invest?" I blinked. "In Brightseed." He smiled, just a hint of his old pride. "Not for control. Just for support. I want to be part of what you've built, not to guide it, but to believe in it." For the first time in my life, I saw my father not as an obstacle, but as a man trying to atone. I smiled. "Let me think about it." He chuckled. "That's fair." When he left, the office felt strangely still. I sat down looking at the empty chair where he'd been, and for once it didn't feel like absence. It felt like a possibility. That night I pulled out an old photo album, the one I hadn't opened in years. Inside were Christmases long gone me in pigtails. Dad lifting me onto his shoulders to put the star on the tree, Mom laughing in the background. I traced the image with my finger. I'd spent so long remembering only the hurt that I'd forgotten the moments that made it worth healing. The ghosts of Christmas past didn't vanish that night, but they grew quieter, not gone, just gentler. I closed the album and whispered into the dark, "I see you, Dad." Finally. And for the first time I knew he could see me too. The buzzing started before dawn. At first I thought it was my alarm, but then I saw the screen, hundreds of missed notifications lighting up my phone like a strobe. My stomach turned cold. The top headline read, "From Nanny to Billionaire inside Emma Carter's Family Feud." There it was. My name. My face. My story. Twisted, sensationalized, sold. A grainy screenshot of my father's shocked expression at the Christmas dinner table filled the top half of the page. The article was merciless. My revenge. My secret empire. The humiliation that turned the Carter dynasty upside down. They even quoted supposed family insiders who said I'd been plotting to expose him for years. By the time I reached the end, my hands were shaking. Every truth I had fought for was now weaponized against me. The knock on my door came just minutes later. "Open up," Nora's voice called. I brought caffeine and bad news. She walked in holding a coffee in one hand, her tablet in the other. "It's everywhere," she said flatly. CNN, Bloomberg, and even TMZ picked it up. The Christmas dinner video is trending again, edited this time to make you look like a cold corporate villain. They're calling it the Billionaire babysitter story. I took the tablet from her. Comment sections filled the screen. Praise tangled with cruelty. She's my hero sitting beside a spoiled rich girl pretending to be humble. My throat tightened. "They don't know anything," I whispered. "They don't care," Nora said. "It's a feeding frenzy. Everyone loves a redemption arc until it threatens to be real." I turned away, pacing the apartment. "Who leaked this? Those quotes about my dad?" "Those weren't public." She hesitated. "I don't know yet. But it's not random. Someone wanted this to blow up. The phone rang again. My assistant's voice crackled through. Emma, the board has called an emergency meeting. Investors are panicking. They want reassurance. Of course they did. The same people who praised me for building an empire now wanted an explanation for daring to have a past. The boardroom was colder than usual, glass walls, gray light faces tight with unease. I could almost smell the anxiety. Emma, said Leonard Haynes, one of our oldest investors, his voice clipped and professional. We all respect what you've built, but this media attention, it's compromising Brightseed's image. Empathy can't be our brand if your story turns into a scandal. A scandal, I repeated. I was mocked by my family. That's not a scandal. That's life. He pressed on. Public perception matters. We'd like to hire a crisis management team and maybe consider issuing a joint statement with your father. Something that signals unity. Unity. The word made my jaw tighten. So I should apologize for being his daughter, perception, he repeated quietly as if the word itself could erase the sting. I glanced around the table. Most avoided my eyes. A few nodded in hesitant agreement. They didn't want truth, they wanted control, just like my father had. I won't apologize, I said. Not for surviving, not for succeeding. Silence followed. Then Leonard exhaled sharply. Emma, we believe in Brightseed. But empathy doesn't mean defiance. It means authenticity, I countered. And authenticity doesn't bow to optics. Nora's gaze met mine from across the room, steady, proud, unflinching. When the meeting ended, no one clapped. The applause was gone. The whispering had returned. That afternoon, Nora found something. You're not going to like this, she said, closing my office door. The leak came from inside. A media outlet traced an encrypted email back to one of our advisors, Caleb Morton. Caleb, the same man who once told me I was too emotional to lead. I found him standing in the hall, leaning against the window, watching the city below like it belonged to him. You leaked it, I said quietly. He didn't even flinch. I gave them what they wanted. You think they care about your software? They care about your story. This publicity will only grow Brightseed. You betrayed me, I said. He smiled thinly. I built your image. Don't act like you don't owe me part of it. For a moment, I wanted to slap him. Instead, I took a step closer, my voice low and steady. You built nothing. You just sold pieces of my pain for clicks. You're fired. He shrugged, almost amused. You can fire me, Emma, but you can't control the narrative. The world has already decided what you are. Then he walked away. His words stayed with me. Maybe he was right. Maybe I couldn't control what the world believed, but I could control what I became next. By nightfall, the city was wrapped in fog and light. I walked the streets alone, coat pulled tight, my face hidden behind a scarf. Seattle pulsed with life, people rushing, laughing, living, and not one of them cared who I was. It was liberating. A street musician played Silent Night on a battered violin. I stopped for a moment, watching his hands tremble in the cold. A little girl dropped $1 into his case, smiling. He smiled back, small, grateful, real. And I remembered why I started all of this. To teach machines what moments like that meant. To make the world more humane, not more performative. I whispered into the wind, you don't get to take that from me. When I got home, the phone rang again. My mother. Her voice was trembling. Emma, your father saw the news. He's devastated. My chest tightened. He thinks I leaked it. He doesn't know what to think. The papers are saying awful things about him. He's barely spoken since this morning. I pressed a hand to my forehead. I didn't do this, Mom. I would never. I know, she said softly. Your father asked me to tell you. He thinks it's better if you don't come home right now. The reporters are everywhere, and he doesn't want them to see you. The line went quiet except for her breathing. I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. Tell him I'm sorry. After the call, I sat by the window watching the city glitter like a circuit board. Somewhere between those lights was the truth, small, persistent, impossible to kill. I opened my laptop and began typing a statement, something to calm the storm. But halfway through, I stopped. Every word felt wrong, defensive, hollow. I deleted it all. They didn't need my voice anymore. They needed my silence. I turned off my phone, powered down my laptop, and let the quiet settle over me. Outside, the fog drifted low across the skyline, softening the sharp edges of the city. For the first time in days, I felt still, not defeated, not angry, just still. The world could scream. I didn't have to answer. And as the screen went black, one last notification blinked before disappearing. From Dad. "We need to talk. Urgent." The knock on my door came just after midnight. I hadn't answered my phone all day, but somehow I knew it would end like this, with him standing there. When I opened the door, my father was on the other side, coat soaked from the Seattle rain, eyes hollowed by exhaustion. "Emma," he said, voice strained. "We need to talk." I stepped aside without a word. The air between us was heavy, sharp, the kind that makes it hard to breathe. He walked in slowly, taking in the apartment like it was foreign territory. Maybe it was. The last time he'd been here, Brightseed hadn't even existed. He turned toward me, water dripping from his sleeves. "I didn't come here to fight." "Good," I said, "because I'm done fighting." He nodded but didn't sit. His gaze landed on a framed photo on my table, me with the Brightseed team at our first launch. "You built all this?" he murmured, more to himself than to me. "And I broke it." "You didn't break it," I said softly. "You just didn't believe in it." He exhaled shakily. "That story online, the video, the press, it's everywhere. I walk into my office and people look at me like I'm a monster." "I'm sorry," I said. "I didn't leak it, Dad. You know that." He looked up, eyes tired but searching. "Do I?" The question hit harder than I expected. I wanted to scream, to throw every memory of his disbelief back in his face. But instead I just whispered, "Yes, you do." For a moment he said nothing. The rain outside hit harder against the windows, each drop like a pulse. Finally he spoke again. "I don't know how to be the man you needed me to be. I only knew how to win, how to compete. I thought if I kept you small you'd stay safe. But all I did was push you away." The honesty in his voice hurt more than his silence ever had. "I didn't need safety," I said. "I needed support. I needed you to see me. I see you now," he said quietly. "And I hate the man I was." I turned away, blinking fast. The city lights blurred through my tears. He walked toward the window, his reflection merging with mine in the glass. "You know, when that Forbes cover came out, everyone called me to say how proud I must be. But I couldn't even answer. I was too ashamed that I didn't know who you were anymore. Maybe that's because I stopped letting you define me," I said. He nodded slowly. "Maybe that's exactly it." Silence stretched between us. Not angry this time, just full. The kind that carries years of things never said. Finally he turned back to me. "They want to destroy you, you know. The media, the investors, the ones who can't stand a woman owning her own story. They'll twist it until you look like me, arrogant, ungrateful." I laughed softly. "Maybe they already have." He studied me for a long moment. "Then don't let them win. Don't become what they say you are. Not for me. Not for anyone." His words startled me, not because of their wisdom, but because of their sincerity. He reached into his coat pocket and handed me an envelope. "It's not money. Don't worry." I opened it carefully. Inside was a stack of old photos, me as a little girl sitting at his desk, scribbling in a notebook beside him. My mother must have taken them. I had forgotten they existed. He pointed to one. "You used to say you wanted to build something that mattered, not just something that made money." I smiled faintly. "You told me it wasn't realistic." He sighed. "And you proved me wrong. You've been proving me wrong your entire life." I didn't know whether to laugh or cry, so I did both. He moved toward the door, pausing with his hand on the knob. "I can't change what I did, Emma, but I can try to be someone you don't have to forgive." "Dad," he shook his head. "Don't say anything. Just keep doing what you're doing. Make the world better than I did." Then he was gone. The apartment felt too quiet after he left. The photos still lay scattered across the coffee table, their edges curling like small ghosts of another life. I picked one up me at 7 years old, grinning with a missing front tooth, wearing one of his oversized ties like a cape. I remembered that day vividly. I told him I wanted to be a boss just like him. He'd laughed and said, "That's cute, honey, but bosses have to be tough." Maybe that was where I learned to be tough, not because I wanted to, but because I had to. I sat on the couch, the city's hum below me, thinking about how strange forgiveness felt. It didn't arrive like lightning. It was slower, a tide coming in quietly, washing away the edges of old anger. The next morning, Nora showed up again, coffee in hand. "You look like you haven't slept." "I didn't," I said. My dad came by. Her eyes widened. "At midnight, yeah. He wanted to talk. For once, he didn't try to fix me." She smiled faintly. "Maybe he's finally learning. Maybe we both are." I handed her the photos. She flipped through them slowly. "You were cute," she said. "I was loud," I replied. "Curious, always asking questions. He used to say, 'I'd make a good lawyer.'" She grinned. "And instead you made robots feel things. Same energy." I laughed, the sound surprising even me. Nora sat down beside me, her tone softening. "You know, all of this, it's not about revenge anymore. It's about rewriting what they told you to believe." I nodded. "It always was." She squeezed my hand. "Then don't let them write the ending." I looked at the window again, the morning light spilling through the rain, soft and golden. My father's words echoed in my head. "Don't become what they say you are." For the first time, I understood. I wasn't the babysitter. I wasn't a billionaire. I wasn't the daughter of Charles Carter, the man who mocked me. I was me. And this time, the story was mine to tell. The morning after my father's visit, I woke to a wall of noise. Rain slammed against the windows, thunder rolled somewhere beyond the skyline, and my phone was buzzing like a hive. Nora's name flashed across the screen, followed by 3 words that made my stomach twist. "We have a problem." By the time I reached the office, the storm outside had followed me in. The glass lobby of Brightseed was crowded with reporters' cameras flashing through the downpour. Headlines blared from their microphones, "Emma Carter's company under investigation for insider leak." Inside, Nora was pacing. "Someone's feeding the press internal data," she said the moment I walked in. "Not just about you, about Brightseed. Investor documents, projections, private contracts. They're painting it as a scandal." "Another leak," I said, my voice tight. "Who?" She hesitated. "We don't know yet." But Caleb's name came up again. I felt the air leave my lungs. I had fired him days ago, but clearly he wasn't done with me. "He's trying to destroy what he can't control," I said. Nora nodded grimly. "He's claiming he's a whistleblower, says, 'You built the company on emotional manipulation, that Brightseed's empathy algorithms are dangerous.'" I laughed, bitter and sharp. "That's his angle. That teaching technology empathy is dangerous. He knows exactly what words will scare them," she said. "Empathy sounds noble until someone calls it control." The room felt smaller. For the first time in months, I felt the fear I thought I'd outgrown. An hour later, I was sitting under studio lights again, this time not for a profile, but for a live interview. My PR team had begged me to address the allegations before the story spun further out of control. The journalist, a sharp-eyed woman named Elise Ward, didn't waste time. "Ms. Carter, the world knows your story from Nanny to Billionaire CEO. But recent reports suggest Brightseed's technology manipulates human emotion. Some even say it's designed to exploit vulnerability. What do you say to that?" I looked into the camera. The lights were hot. My heartbeat thudded in my ears. "I built Brightseed to make empathy measurable," I said. "To help people be seen, not sold to. Anyone calling that manipulation doesn't understand the difference between empathy and exploitation." Elise tilted her head. "Or maybe they understand too well." There it was, the dagger wrapped in curiosity. I took a breath, steady but deliberate. Technology doesn't corrupt people. People corrupt technology. If someone misuses our tools, that's not innovation's fault. It's human greed. And that's exactly what Brightseed exists to fight. For a moment, silence. Then Elise smiled faintly. Not friendly, not cruel, just calculating. Strong words, Ms. Carter. I suppose the world will decide what to believe. She turned to the camera. Emma Carter, billionaire innovator, and depending on who you ask, the most misunderstood woman in tech. The red light blinked off. When I walked out of the studio, my hands were trembling, but not from fear, from fury. Caleb had turned my mission into a weapon. That evening, I ignored the dinner invitations and locked myself in my office with Nora. We need proof that Caleb is working against us, not just blowing a whistle, I told her. Run a full internal audit on his last week of activity. Cross-reference his unauthorized server access times with any unusual external communications. Nora worked quickly, her fingers flying over the keyboard. 2 hours later, she froze. Emma, look at this. He didn't just leak data. He was communicating with an external IP address linked to a company called Aegis Solutions, a shell corporation we know is funded by one of our biggest competitors, Vanguard Tech. I stared at the screen. Caleb hadn't been seeking justice. He was selling us out. He wasn't trying to expose my story, Nora. He was trying to destroy my company for Vanguard. Exactly, she confirmed. This isn't a personal feud. It's corporate sabotage. I took a deep, steadying breath. This changed everything. It wasn't about public opinion anymore. It was about exposing the truth with evidence. Get the legal team on a secure line now. We need an injunction against Aegis and Caleb. And call my father. He has connections deep in the Seattle business press. He needs to know what's really going on. The storm outside grew violent. Lightning cracked above the city, and thunder shook the glass walls of my apartment. I felt the surge of adrenaline, not the panicked kind, but the focused, predatory kind. I wasn't the victim anymore. I was the CEO, and I had proof. The next morning, the world had already made its decision. Half the internet was calling me a visionary. The other half called me a manipulator. Forbes ran a new headline, The Dark Side of Empathy Tech, How Brightseed Crossed the Line. Nora threw the magazine onto my desk. They're turning you into a villain. I stared at the cover, my own face again, but colder this time. Maybe villains just have better PR. She frowned. You can joke all you want, but this could kill the company. Investors are already pulling back. I took a deep breath. Then let them. I didn't build this to please shareholders. What did you build it for, Emma? Her question stopped me. I turned toward the window the storm had passed, leaving a silver mist over the skyline. I built it, I said slowly, so people wouldn't have to beg to be understood. So no one else would sit at a dinner table and feel invisible. Nora nodded quietly. Then maybe that's the story you need to tell. I already did, I said, picking up the printout of Caleb's communications. Now we fight with facts. My father called at 9 sharp. His voice was all business, the Charles Carter I had known my entire life, but this time he was on my side. I saw the evidence you sent, he said, skipping any pleasantries. Caleb Vanguard Aegis, textbook corporate espionage. They aren't going after your tech, Emma. They're going after the valuation. They're attacking my integrity, I corrected him. Which is exactly what I'm going to fix, he said. I still own a substantial stake in the Seattle Economic Journal. I've called in a favor with the editor. They're running a piece today, a full investigation into Vanguard's shell corporations and Caleb's breach of contract. It won't be about the billionaire babysitter anymore. It will be about corporate greed versus innovation. I leaned back in my chair, speechless. He wasn't giving me advice. He was deploying his network, his power to protect me. Dad, you don't have to. Yes, I do, he cut in, his voice firm. You gave me the ammunition. I'm firing the shot. I've spent my life building walls, Emma. Today I will tear one down for you. You deserve the truth, not their noise. By noon, the Seattle Economic Journal's expose hit the news feeds. The tone shift was immediate and brutal for Vanguard. The narrative fractured. I was no longer the scandalous daughter, but the CEO fighting corporate sabotage. The media frenzy quiets as attention turns to the actual financial crime. 24 hours later, the headlines shifted. Outside, the storm had calmed, but I hadn't. That evening, I sat by the window watching the city glitter like a circuit board. The phone remained blessedly silent. I thought about Caleb, vanquished not by my empathy, but by my father's fierce defense, a defense finally directed toward me. The air felt different. It wasn't the peace of victory. It was the solidity of being defended. My phone buzzed once more. This time the message was from my father. "Proud of you. The world sees a storm. I see my daughter." I looked out over the water, the lights rippling across its surface, and whispered to no one. Then maybe the storm was worth it. The next morning I woke to the sound of notifications again, but this time they weren't attacks. My inbox overflowed with messages from doctors, teachers, single mothers, and even former babysitters who said Brightseed's story had inspired them. "You made me believe kindness isn't weakness," one message read. "Thank you for reminding us that success doesn't have to mean forgetting who we are." I stared at those words longer than I meant to. Kindness. That word had once been the punchline at my family's table. Now it was the heartbeat of everything I'd built. The city outside was still damp from last night's rain. I opened the window and breathed in the cold air, sharp, clean, alive. My father's keychain sat on the counter, glinting in the light, the engraved words catching my eye again, "For the woman who built doors where walls used to be." There was something about that line that lingered in my chest like a melody I hadn't finished singing. By noon, Nora came in, laptop under her arm and a grin that could have powered the whole office. "You're not going to believe this," she said. "Brightseed just hit our biggest partnership deal, yet the National Health Institute wants to implement our empathy diagnostics in hospitals across the country." I blinked. "You're serious?" "As a heart attack," she said, then immediately frowned. "Okay, bad metaphor, but yes. They want you to lead the rollout. Your speech last night didn't just inspire people, it changed minds. For a second, I didn't move. I just let it sink in. The girl they once mocked for changing diapers was now changing the landscape of medicine." I laughed softly, half in disbelief. "Sometimes karma moves fast." Nora smirked. "Yeah, she works overtime when the story's good." The news spread faster than I could process it. Forbes ran a headline that almost made me laugh. "From Family Feud to future visionary Emma Carter redefines tech with heart." Same publication that once called me the billionaire babysitter. I couldn't help but think how poetic it was. By afternoon, I was sitting in a boardroom filled with representatives from the National Health Institute. Men and women in suits, polished and skeptical, stared at me across the long table. One of them, a gray-haired man with wire-framed glasses, leaned forward. "Ms. Carter, your technology has potential, but some of us still question its ethics. Teaching empathy to machines sounds noble. But how do you ensure it isn't abused?" I met his gaze steadily. "We don't teach machines to replace empathy," I said. "We teach them to recognize it, to remind us when we're losing it. Empathy is still a human job. Brightseed just helps us remember how to do it better." For a moment he said nothing. Then slowly he nodded. "You sound like someone who's had to remember that herself." I smiled faintly. "Every day." The room went quiet for a heartbeat, the kind of silence that holds respect instead of doubt. That evening I returned home to find a small package waiting at my door. There was no return address, just a plain brown box with my name written in familiar handwriting. My father's. Inside was a single object, a silver locket. When I opened it, I found 2 photos, one of me as a child, sitting on his shoulders laughing. The other, a clipping from Forbes, the one where they named me Visionary of the Year. Between the 2 pictures he had written in tiny, careful letters, "I'm proud of both versions of you." The tears came before I could stop them. Not the sharp kind, but the quiet kind, the ones that release something you didn't realize you'd been holding on to. I sank into the couch, clutching the locket, and whispered, "Thank you." 2 days later, I was invited to appear on a televised panel about women in leadership. I almost said no. I was tired of being dissected, labeled, categorized. But something in me knew this conversation wasn't about me anymore. When the host asked, "What does power mean to you?" I didn't hesitate. Power, I said, isn't about control. It's about compassion that doesn't bend under pressure. It's about standing in a room full of people who doubted you and choosing not to become them. The audience erupted into applause, but I didn't feel triumphant. I felt peaceful. Afterward, a young woman approached me backstage, maybe 22, nervous but determined. "Ms. Carter," she said, "my dad told me I'd never make it in tech because I'm too sensitive. Hearing your story made me realize maybe that's exactly what makes me good at it." I smiled, remembering all the times I'd been told the same thing. "Never lose that," I said. "Sensitivity isn't a flaw, it's your compass. It's what keeps you human when the world tries to turn you into a machine." She nodded, eyes shining. "Thank you." I watched her walk away and thought, maybe this is what redemption looks like, not revenge, but reflection. That night I met my parents for dinner at a small Italian restaurant by the harbor. No grand chandeliers, no catered chefs, just warm bread, soft lighting, and peace. Mom reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "You look lighter," she said. "I feel it," I admitted. Dad smiled quietly. "You know, when I used to talk about legacy, I thought it meant buildings, companies, bank accounts. But watching you, I think I finally get it." "What is it then?" I asked. "Legacy," he said softly, "is the people we make better by being brave enough to change." For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel the urge to prove anything. I didn't need to. The story had already shifted. As we ate, the conversation flowed easily. Laughter, small stories, even a few awkward jokes that somehow felt comforting. When dessert came, Dad raised his glass. "To the one thing the world can't measure," he said, looking at me. "Heart." We clinked glasses. The sound was soft, but it echoed deep. When I got home that night, I stood by the window watching the city lights shimmer across the water. My reflection looked back at me not as the billionaire, not as the babysitter, not even as the daughter. Just as Emma. For years I had chased validation, then vengeance, then victory. But in the end, the real win was quieter peace. Outside, a light drizzle began again, each drop soft against the glass. It sounded less like a storm this time, more like applause from the sky. And for once, I let myself simply listen. It was Christmas Eve again. 1 year since the dinner that changed everything. The snow had started early that morning, thin flakes drifting down over the city, softening its edges, quieting its pulse. I stood at my apartment window, a cup of coffee in hand, watching the lights blink across the skyline. Seattle looked different this year. Or maybe I was the one who had changed. The world outside was calm, but my phone buzzed nonstop. Invitations, press inquiries, charity galas, end-of-year features. For once, I didn't feel the need to say yes to any of them. Brightseed was thriving. Our hospital partnership had just been renewed, and we were expanding into Europe. I had everything I'd worked for: recognition, stability, respect. But what I wanted most tonight was quiet. Then came the call I hadn't expected. My father. "Dinner's at 6, he said, his voice softer than I remembered. "Same house. Fewer cameras this time." I laughed quietly. "You sure that's a good idea? Last time we made the evening news." "That's why we're keeping it small," he said. "Just family. No microphones, no Forbes." I hesitated for a second, then smiled. "I'll be there." When I pulled into the old driveway, everything looked almost the same: the big oak tree lit with gold ribbons, the front steps dusted in snow, and the familiar glow spilling through the windows. But something in the air felt different, lighter. Mom opened the door before I could knock. "You're early," she said, surprised but smiling. "I didn't want to miss dessert this year," I said. She laughed and hugged me longer than she ever used to. Inside the house smelled like cinnamon pine and roasted turkey. The same traditions, the same table, only this time, it didn't feel like a stage. Dad was in the dining room pouring wine. He looked up when I entered and smiled. "Emma." "Dad." We stared for a second, two stubborn people learning how to speak the same language. Then he raised his glass. "Glad you came. Glad you asked." At the table sat familiar faces, my brother Liam and his wife Rachel, who looked much more grounded than last year. My mom bustling around with plates, and Dad at the head calmer somehow. I took my seat, the same one I'd once dreaded, and waited for the unease to return. It didn't. The conversation started slowly careful. Then, as the meal went on, it loosened. Liam asked about Brightseed, but without the sarcasm that used to lace his tone. "You're still expanding," he asked. "I saw your press release on the hospital contracts." "It's huge." I nodded. "We just launched in New York. Hospitals are using the software to screen for early signs of burnout in doctors." "That's actually incredible," he said. "We just started funding a community health initiative through my firm's nonprofit arm, a free clinic downtown. We're integrating Brightseed's triage system there next month. It's going to make a serious difference in patient intake, Em." For a moment, I just looked at him. Liam wasn't just talking business. He was talking impact, using my technology to further his own efforts in social responsibility. It was the highest form of respect he could offer. "Thank you, Liam," I said, genuinely touched. "That means a lot." Mom smiled proudly. "Your father won't admit it, but he reads every article about you." Dad rolled his eyes. "I just like to stay informed." We laughed, and something in that laughter healed a piece of me I didn't know was still broken. Later, when the plates were cleared and the candles burned low, Dad reached into his jacket pocket and slid an envelope across the table. "Before dessert," he said, "there's something I want to do." I hesitated. "What is it?" "An amendment," he said with a grin. "To the will." I froze. The word itself carried a lifetime of old wounds, inheritance, favoritism, exclusion. But he held up a hand before I could speak. "This isn't about money," he said. "It's about acknowledgement." I opened the envelope. Inside was a single page handwritten. Not legal language, not clauses or signatures. Just a letter. "Emma," it read, "you've built something no estate can equal. You turned our name into something I'm proud to stand behind. So from this day forward, you're not just my daughter. You're my legacy." My throat tightened. For a long moment I couldn't speak. Then I looked up and Dad was already wiping at his eyes. "Guess we're both bad at goodbyes," he said. I reached across the table and took his hand. "Then don't say goodbye. Just keep showing up." He nodded, his smile trembling. "I can do that." After dinner I stepped outside for air. Snow had blanketed the yard, sparkling under the porch lights. The night was so still I could hear my own breath. Inside, laughter echoed softer this time, human, real. Liam joined me, hands in his pockets. "You know," he said quietly, "I used to think you were running from us. Turns out, you were just running towards something we couldn't see yet." I looked at him surprised. "And now," he smiled, "now I see it." We stood in silence for a while, the cold nipping at our cheeks. It wasn't forgiveness exactly, it was understanding. And that was enough. Later that night I drove home through the quiet streets, Christmas lights glowing through the fog. The city felt peaceful again, like it had been holding its breath all year and was finally exhaling. When I got home, I poured a glass of wine, sat by the window, and watched the snow fall. My reflection shimmered faintly in the glass, older, stronger, softer. On the coffee table sat my father's letter beside the keychain he'd given me. I traced the engraved words with my thumb, for the woman who built doors where walls used to be. Outside, the city lights flickered like constellations, and I realized something. Revenge had never been the point. Vindication wasn't the prize. The real victory was quieter peace. I picked up my phone, opened the Brightseed social page, and typed a short post. This time last year, I thought I had to build an empire to be seen. Turns out, the moment I stopped chasing validation, I found my freedom. Success isn't revenge, it's peaceful. Merry Christmas to everyone still fighting to be understood. You're already enough. I hit the post and set the phone down. Then I turned off the lights, curled up on the couch, and let the silence wrap around me. The snow kept falling, slow, steady, endless. And for the first time, I didn't feel like I was watching life happen. I was living it. If my story meant something to you, if you've ever been underestimated and found your strength anyway, Tell me yours. Because somewhere out there, another woman is sitting in the dark, waiting to remember her own light. And she deserves to see it shine.